Hello YouTube, this is the first of my stats-laden videos, so I would like to go through my first few weeks doing this job from scratch. And before I do that, I want to just clarify what I feel the use of these videos would be. I think I'm designing these really in mind for those people who have not started doing same-day courier work or have only just started, who are very new to it. And so I'm giving information that's very basic. It's basically my real life experience from doing this, from having no links to logistics, no contacts within the industry beforehand, just working from the CX at the start. So it's quite basic. If you're experienced CX driver or same-day courier, you might not get very much from this. It's really designed for those people who know nothing or very little, to share, to help, to encourage those people to start if they want to, or to keep going if they just started and they're feeling it's difficult. Right, so I'm going to start off by explaining to you the sort of stats that I collect and what I do with them. So there's what I use a spreadsheet on my phone, and the first set of things that I record are my fuel costs. So the way that I do that is every time that I fill up my fuel tank, I record the mileage and the number of litres that I've filled up. And so in my spreadsheet I can work out the current mileage, how that's different from the last mileage figure that I had when I last filled up, and divide that number by the number of litres, so I get the number of litres per mile. I then also add to the spreadsheet the cost of that fuel, and I do have a fuel card, so it's cheaper than the pump prices, and so I can then work out from the spreadsheet what is my pence per mile cost of fuel. So every mile that I drive, I know how much my fuel has cost me to do that mile, and obviously that changes over as the price of fuel changes, so each week it will be different. So to account for that, what I do is I average out each week what each individual pence per mile figure is for that week, to give me an average pence per mile each week. And then I take that figure onto my next spreadsheet. So in my main spreadsheet, the figures that I record, every day I do work, I record the time that I leave for work, the mileage at the start of the day from when I leave home, and I record the time that I finish work, get home usually, and the mileage that I have when I've got home. And I remember those four things quite easily. So when I put into my spreadsheet those four figures, every day it calculates for me how many hours I've worked and how many miles I've driven in total that day. That will include going to a job and the actual job itself, and coming home from a job at the end of the day. So it includes all the mileage that I do each day. I also add to that spreadsheet the pence per mile figure that I got from my previous spreadsheet for the fuel cost. And I also add into that spreadsheet what I've earned each day. And as I said in the previous video, I only ever record what I've earned on the day that I finish a job. So some jobs might take more than a day to complete, in which case I'll only ever add the amount that I've earned for that job. It might have taken 2 days to do it, but I only record the earnings on the day that I finish the job. I just feel that's a more accurate way of reflecting it. Yes. So, from all those figures, my spreadsheet gives me some useful information. So the first thing that I get is every day I have a spreadsheet that tells me what is the amount of money I've spent on fuel that day. And that's simply worked out from the number of miles I've travelled from door to door, from my house back to my house, times the pence per mile for that fuel that week. And then I take that total cost of fuel off my earnings to give me a net income for that day after I've paid for my fuel. And as I've said in a previous video, I'm aiming to try and achieve a target of £250 a day after I've paid for my fuel. And that figure means that I can pay all my business expenses, I can pay the income that I need and have some savings. So at £250 per day, based on a 5-day working week, I can afford to live off that. So if I do work a 5-day week, I'm aiming to get a total after fuel of £1,250 each week. So my spreadsheet also adds up at the end of the week how much is the total that I've earned. And I think the total amount that I've earned in a week is an indication of how hard I've worked. So the harder you work, the more money you earn. But there's a crucial last figure that I also calculate, and that is the earned pence per mile. So that's just worked out by the amount of money that I've earned after fuel divided by the number of miles that I've driven. So that to me is an indicator about how well you're doing the job. The higher your earned pence per mile, the better you are at doing this job. And I think by explaining it in that way, you'll see when I give you my figures in a moment what I mean by that more clearly. So I think that's a good summary about the sorts of figures I keep and why. And I'm going to go run through now my first 10 weeks of work and give you what I think are the main figures. One slight note, I realised when I was calculating these figures that actually I had a week off in May. So although I've only got 10 weeks worth of figures, I've actually started this job 11 weeks ago. So 1 week obviously was no money. So week 1. This was my very first day of doing this job, was the 7th of March. Actually, before I go into the figures, I want to give you a bit of background to that date. I was looking into doing this job from January, and looking at the YouTube videos and looking at what was the situation, it became obvious to me that January was a really bad time to start doing this, and as was February. So one of the things I got from the YouTube videos was not to, because that is a difficult time to make money. But there had to come a point at which I did start, and I chose the start of March, or in this case the second week of March, to take the plunge. I could have waited for the summer for now, but I just didn't want to wait that long. And my view was, I learn by doing the job, so I need to learn how to do it before I get any good at it. So I might as well start now. So I didn't do it in February when I possibly could have done work in February from the CX. I didn't join that until March. Okay, so the 7th of March was my first sort of foray into this, and I had 3 days work in that first week. Roughly, my pence per mile, the fuel pence per mile was about 18 pence per mile it cost me for fuel. And so after I'd worked that week, I earned after fuel costs £395, £395 for 3 days work. And my income rate was 39.44 pence per mile. So, well, it was a start. It wasn't really a good start, but I was learning all the time. But I was glad I got started. Week 2, I worked 5 days in that week. The average cost of fuel for me that week was 17.92 pence per mile. So over those 5 days, after fuel costs were taken into account, I earned £977. That's 977. My income per mile didn't go up very much. It was 39.49 pence. It barely moved at all. Week 3, I worked 6 days that week. fuel went down slightly to 16.33 pence per mile on average. And so at the end of that week, I earned after fuel £718, 718. My income rate went up slightly to 49.17 pence per mile. Week 4, just to give you some reference, it's the 27th of March, the last week of March. I worked 3 days that week, and the price of fuel was in the region of 15 pence per mile cost to me. And I earned £333, 333 after fuel costs, and that was a income rate of 44.14 pence per mile that I worked. So that brought me to the end of March, my very first month. And for those people who are brand new, you will have, if you've seen any YouTube videos, know that you have to invoice for this job, and so you have to wait for your income to come in. But for the sake of being complete, my very first invoice, I was very lucky, I got it paid on the 16th of March. It was the day after I did that job. And by the end of March, I had been paid for 4 jobs within that month. So that did help, that really did help, having a bit of income even in the first month. Okay, we've gone to week 5 now. I worked 5 days in that week, and this was my first really good week. The cost of fuel that week on average was 14.31 pence per mile, and after those fuel costs were taken into account, I earned £1,037 after fuel, and that was a rate of 48.37 pence per mile. So my pence per mile rate didn't go up very much, but I did more work. In week 8, oh yes, at this point in time, I want to tell you one thing that I found out about doing this job, which I think it's worth sharing at this point. I definitely was still am in a learning phase with this. I felt that I had to learn how to do the job before I had any right to expect that I could earn a decent income from it. And every week during this time, every week I started thinking, excellent, I've got another week to have a go at this job. Let's really smash it this week. I've learnt from last week, I'm going to be better this week. And so for the first couple of weeks that didn't really pan out, but by week 5 and 6 I was making some reasonably good money, and that optimism was paying off, it was working for me. So go back to week 6, I worked for 5 days. The average fuel price got up slightly to 14.87 pence per mile. So after fuel I earned £902 that week, 902. But I did earn a better per mile income. It was 59.49 pence per mile. So I was definitely getting better at this job by this point. In week 7, for reference, it was the 19th of April. The fuel costs were 15.02 pence per mile, went up slightly from the week before. I actually worked every day this week, 7 days, and it wasn't a very successful week in terms of my pence per mile, because I only made 38 pence per mile, quite a poor pence per mile. Actually the worst pence per mile since I started, even from week 1. And that was down to a very poor decision I made to go to Scotland. 2 poor decisions. One, I did it on a backload rate, trying to get a coda which I didn't get. And 2, I went up on a Friday, so that meant on Saturday I was in Scotland with no job. So I had to just come back with no job. I think I found a small job towards the northwest, back towards the Midlands. But effectively it was a lot of dead miles. But a lesson really well learned. Several lessons learned. And Scotland was a lovely place to go to. I do like going to Scotland. So I earned in total that week £922, 922 after fuel. Week 8, the fuel prices went down slightly to 14.74 pence per mile on average, and I worked 6 days that week, and I earned after fuel £991, 991. So my income rate was 45.35 pence per mile. now coming to week 9. But by this time, I've really felt, come on, you can do this, you can get a good week. And this is the first of the 3 bank holidays in May, so I only worked 4 days in this first week. This is the first week of May. The fuel had gone down again to 13.78 pence per mile, and I earned after fuel £1,098. This is for 4 days' work, remember? So my pence per mile was 62.55 pence. So that was the first time I made my target of £250 per day on average after fuel. It was only a 4-day week, but again, it was progress. I then didn't work the following week, so my week 10 is actually 2 weeks after that last week. So on the 15th of May, in that week again, I only worked 4 days. The fuel had gone down again to 12.79 pence per mile, and for those 4 days I earned £661 after fuel. So not very good, but my mileage income rate was 63.65 pence per mile. And remember, that figure is after fuel is taken into account of. So if you add on the 12.79 pence per mile that I've already taken off, my kind of gross mileage income rate is about 75p, which isn't too bad for someone who's quite new to this job. And remember, that's the mileage from door to door, not just for the jobs. It's getting between the jobs as well. Okay, so that brings me to this week. Obviously, I'm in the middle of this week right now, so I'm not going to give you the figures. I have done a video for midweek, which I'm going to release in a moment as well. But I've learned a lot from all that. So I will summarise with one thing that I learned from it. And I suppose it's in one of my first videos I said that I learned from making mistakes. And I've made this mistake twice in this job, and I now won't make it again. But I've learned it because I've made the mistake. YouTube tell you this, people will tell you this. I knew that in theory you shouldn't do this, but I'd forgotten it until I came to the job. And this is the thing that I learned. It was the Scotland trip. Don't take a trip to Scotland on a Friday, because unless you're going to stay in Scotland for the weekend, because you're not going to get a job back from Scotland to the Midlands on the Saturday. I have experimented with doing work on Saturdays, and it's very hit and miss, up and down. I would work on a Saturday. I've got no problem doing it, as you've seen from a few 6 or 7 day weeks I've done. But it's possibly only worth doing if you've got a job booked in and you can find a job to get yourself there, so you get all your dead miles paid for. It's not as easy as it is in the week, and sometimes in the week it's not that easy. So anyway, I learnt that about being very mindful about the day on a Friday where I end up going. And as I said, I've learnt that now because I've done it. So thank you very much for watching this video. What have you learnt today?